Clerk.
Business. Order of the day number 2, Social Security Legislation Amendment, Increased Employment Participation Bill 2014, resumption of debate on second reading and on the amendment moved by the member for Franklin.
The original question was that this bill be now read a second time. To this, the honourable member for Franklin has moved as an amendment that all words after that be omitted with a view to substituting other words. If it suits the House, I will state the question in the form that the amendment be agreed to. The question now is that the amendment be agreed to, and I call the honourable member for Murray.
I thank you, Madam Speaker. I wish to also speak on this Social Security Amendment Increased Employment Participation Bill 2014. The bill gives effect to 2 coalition election commitments, the Job Commitment Bonus and the Relocation Assistance to Take Up a Job program, and both will commence on the 1st of July 2014. Australia has a long history of trying to help the unemployed. It goes back more than 100 years. We had, of course, a unique soldier-settler program with World War I and the Great Ocean Road we've recently acknowledged as 100 years old, and with a great deal of additional coalition support, it's going to be rejuvenated and made again an outstanding world-class memorial to those great First World War soldiers. But the point about the construction of that great Australian road was it was also to employ the returned servicemen, many of them suffering mental health injuries, and it was many years that they were given employment on that construction. We also, of course, in the Second World War had a closer settlement and soldier settlement program, again to employ those coming back from war who needed Australian government support. Now, the Coalition believes that every Australian who is capable of work should have a job. The best way to deal with poverty, with depression, anxiety, is for an Australian to have a job and, if necessary, to be assisted into that job. We acknowledge that some people live a long way from where there might be employment. We acknowledge that for some people their education isn't sufficient, or they may have active discrimination against them because of their ethnicity or the way they present to employer. So we, as the Coalition, understand and are putting into place a series of measures to help those who are unemployed, and sadly, under Labor, the queues of those waiting to receive welfare assistance as the great unemployed got longer. It was particularly long for those who couldn't afford childcare. It was particularly long for the youth who lived in rural and regional areas, for Aboriginal people, for those with a disability but who wished to work and could work. Under Labor, we had to simply watch as those queues grew longer, and token efforts were made to support them, but unfortunately those token efforts rarely did anything more than give some press releases for the minister in charge of that particular area. But our understanding is, from our long experience, that you need to be serious about job support, and that's why these 2 particular initiatives we know will do a great deal. The first is, in fact, trying to assist people who get off the welfare, the New Start allowance, having been on it for about 12 months, who take a job, and we understand and do acknowledge that sometimes that first job, in terms of its pay, is not much different to the welfare that they were receiving before. But we know that the difference between being on welfare and being in a job where you have your own income, where you can choose what you spend your cash on, where you can build into a bigger and better job as time goes by, that is a significant reward in itself. So we've produced a job commitment bonus. It's a new payment. There's no equivalent payment, and there was never intended to be an equivalent payment under the former Labor government. This bonus rewards young people aged 18 to 30 who get and keep a job and remain off welfare, and after 12 months they will receive $2,500. If they remain in that position and are off welfare for a further 12 months, they may be eligible for another $4,000. And that is 24 months in total of employment. Some people who are in a very large income might wonder why you'd be excited about $2,500. Well, let me assure you, if you're only earning $25,000 or $30,000, that's a significant bonus. And it's an incentive for people who might need to buy a car and who might need to, in fact, put fuel in that car weekly. I think that's a very serious incentive indeed. The other major part of this program is what we've called the Relocation Assistance to Take Up a Job program. And as I say, we acknowledge that for some Australians you're a long way from the job. It might be you're in a metropolitan area and you need to move from one side of the city to another. We acknowledge that that takes often some funds to relocate. You might be in a rural area and you need to go to a metropolitan, or you're in a metropolitan region and you need to shift to a country town. All of that takes some funding, and so we will be supplying special financial support for that relocation. And I think that is an extraordinarily sensible thing to do. We did in fact have a relocation program under the John Howard government, when in fact I was the Minister for Workforce Participation, and we took numbers of people from rural regional areas in New South Wales, on the coast, across to the mining jobs in and around Perth. Those were extraordinarily successful relocations. People were trained when they reached the mining regions. They were supported in having their bonds for their flats and hostels paid in the first instance for the first few months. And those people not only succeeded in that work with that relocation, but also talked some of their long-term unemployed friends across from the east coast of New South Wales across to those goldfields. And that relocation action was extraordinarily successful, but of course it was abolished under Labor. Now, we heard just before the House was adjourned an extraordinary contribution from the Labor member, and she, in putting up her amendment, suggested that there were in fact much better ways to go about getting people into employment in Australia. I find it extraordinary that she has these bright ideas, given none of them were put into play when Labor in fact was in government. Let me remind you of what happened when we were in opposition, the coalition. Labor claimed to be concerned for youth unemployment, but in fact under Labor the unemployment rate for young people rose from 9.9% to over 12.7%. It's over 30% in my area and higher for our Indigenous young Australians. That was 55,000 young Australians unemployed after 6 years of the Labor government. I find that figure, 55,000, extraordinary. Those are young people who deserve a future, but under Labor they had no future, just the dole queues. And of course we are committed to action. That's why we're working actively with stakeholders, with the training organisations and industry, to improve the fractured training system left behind by those opposite through our VET reform task force. The Labor members opposite stripped away the employer incentives and destroyed the hopes of many young people of ever gaining a traineeship or an apprenticeship through, and therefore meaningful employment. We understand only too well that it's not the government who creates real jobs with real productivity outcomes. It's not government, it's small business and larger business, it's family businesses. And so we've introduced these reforms, which will try and create an environment for greater economic growth, because a strong economy, of course, creates new opportunities for all Australians, including our younger job seekers. And of course, it's sheer hypocrisy for those on the other side to talk about superior programs for employing young people from their now position of opposition when they continue to refuse to support removing the carbon tax. The carbon tax is job destroying. In my region in particular, we know that it means our dairy farmers can't employ milkers, our refrigerant gas tax, which there was called the carbon equivalent tax by Labor, puts another $100,000 into regassing our large cool stores. Those people then look very much like having to let go some of their hundreds of employees. So as long as Labor and the Greens continue to block the repeal of the carbon tax in the Senate, we know that they're not serious about giving young people a job. It's a clear message that to the electors of Australia that they don't take their democratic decisions seriously. We have also, of course, want to scrap the mining tax, a tax which caused great uncertainty and collects practically no revenue, but puts a dead hand on mining enterprises which are already finding it tougher as the years go by. We, of course, are also re-establishing the rule of law on construction sites by reintroducing the Australian Building and Construction Commission. Our great building industry was always an employer of apprentices and young people, but under Labor they blocked the most critical reforms at the behest of the unions. We will try and put back order and productivity once again into the Australian building and construction industry. We, of course, have also committed to slashing red tape, green tape to free up businesses. When you free up businesses, they can start to employ again. And it was also appalling that the unions decided to try and tamper with the 457 visas, which brought skilled labour to rural areas. You might say, well, what's that to do with youth unemployment? Well, the point is, if you can't employ vets into a local piggery, as we used to be able to do under the 457 visas, mostly vets from the Philippines, then they can't expand as a business and employ young people as job-level entry piggery workers who can work their way through to being managers. We'll be setting that 457 visa blockage right as the months go by. So let me say specifically that the job commitment bonus is a significant investment by the Coalition. It will help young, long-term unemployed Australians make a positive change in their life, specifically moving away from welfare dependency to finding and keeping a job, to gaining self-respect, to gaining a sense of their being able to put back into a community that's nurtured them. The job commitment bonus is an incentive to young people to be persistent in pursuing employment opportunities. Unfortunately, if you've grown up in a household with generations who've never had a job, the work ethic of persisting with an employer, working through problems and difficulties, is often something that you haven't learned at your mother or father's knee. But with an incentive like this, we're hoping that younger people will learn the value of persisting and committing long-term to an employer. This incentive, this bonus, we hope will give them a sense that at the end of 12 months, in fact at the end of 24 months, there will be a substantial cash bonus for them. It's about committing to the world of work rather than being trapped in the world of welfare. The bonus is an extra feature to the support already available, of course, to young job seekers. We heard from the opposition that they're concerned that New Zealanders in the protected special category visa holder group are not eligible for this job commitment bonus. They thought that was a terrible thing. But of course, this is, as we are presenting this program, it's consistent with our election commitment that this is a targeted measure. It is an investment by this government to help young, long-term, unemployed Australians. And we want them to make a positive change in their life. This payment is not intended as further income support. It's a bonus to reward young Australian job seekers who find and keep a job. And it's consistent with the bilateral social security arrangements between Australia and New Zealand eligible New Zealand SCV holders, who still do have access to income support. So we make no apology about encouraging young people to get and keep a job. The bonus is a targeted measure, and we acknowledge that not all Australian job seekers are eligible. The fact that a protected SCV holder is not eligible for the job commitment bonus does not impact on whether they are eligible for other Australian social security payments. And of course, the previous Labor contribution to this debate was that the Move to Work, their program, makes special provisions for redundant workers to benefit from the program, whereas our Relocation to Take Up a Job does not. Well, the Relocation to Take Up a Job program is a targeted initiative for the long-term unemployed. The purpose of our program is to offer assistance to long-term unemployed people to help with the costs of relocation so they are able to move to where the jobs are. The government has other specific measures in place to assist people who are made redundant from work, such as through Job Services Australia. So again, I find that actual condemnation of our programs quite empty, and I particularly find it quite extraordinary that there'd be criticism of these two programs when we look at the legacy of Labor in terms of the long, very long unemployment queues, particularly for young people. So let me say that a legislative instrument created under the new provisions will allow the Secretary of the Department of Employment to prescribe circumstances where the job commitment bonus will not be available, such as circumstances where the social security system has been abused. We want to make sure that we don't have welfare cheats. We don't have people spending a lot of time working out how to get around our welfare system. We want all of our energies of our young people to be dedicated to finding work. and staying in work. That's why these two programs are so important. I want to particularly say that as a regional member from rural Victoria, we need these programs. We have young people idling away their lives. We have young girls with very young babies, three children before they're, say, 19, and they need a lot of support to find jobs, to get affordable childcare, to get accessible childcare, and then they need special support if they need to relocate, and certainly a bonus if they stay in that job for at least 12, if not 24 months. So I commend our piece of legislation to the House.
I thank the honourable member for Murray.